Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we're going to be talking about Sansa, and this is a pre-recorded live stream, so if you are watching this live, I'm not live, but the chat is still there. I may even be able to pop into the chat there, who knows. But this is pre-recorded, so I won't be able to take any super chats or anything like that. Um, that said, we'll talk about Sansa today. I've got questions, as usual, from my patrons. What I will do is, I normally on these kind of things set out the background, the history of the character we're talking about. I think we're all pretty much um, up to speed with Sansa and her story, but there's a few things I think we should probably draw out for the book that perhaps aren't as apparent from the TV show. First is her age. Now, Sophie Turner, obviously, with the rest of the cast, aged during the filming of Game of Thrones. In the books, at the start, she is 11. Sansa is 11. By the time we've got up to where we're at now, about to start the Winds of Winter, then she is 13, maybe 14. So she's still young, very young. And she starts out as an 11-year-old, very idealistic, very much wanting to escape Winterfell, the boring north, and head down south. She has these wonderful visions of knights in shining armor and kings with all of their sort of wonderful virtues, and the world is a better place in the south. So this is her arc from where she starts, coming all the way back around in some way to Winterfell, to a better place for her. We think. I will come back onto this a little bit later, because George R. R. Martin has said something very recently which perhaps makes us reassess a little bit about where this arc is going. But I think one of the key things we've got going on here with Sansa is that she, from quite early on in this story, she is alone as a Stark. Most of the other Starks are also alone, it has to be said. Arya is alone. Jon at the Wall is alone as a Stark. Rickon heads off alone. Bran is alone as a Stark. So the Stark siblings do head off on their own. But Sansa is alone among enemies for pretty much all of her story. She heads down south, obviously, with her father and with the Stark entourage. But once um, the coup against, if that's the right word, against Ned happens, then she is very much on her own. She's there at the mercy of Cersei, and she's there at the mercy of Joffrey. Um, and through her time there, she learns. Uh, she, I actually quite like one of the lines from the TV show when she says, "I do learn. I am a slow learner, but I do learn." And that does kind of encapsulate her book character, it has to be said, is that she does learn through this process. She got quite a bit of hate within the book fandom quite early on, but that's starting to turn around as people are starting to see that she is shifting as a person. She is taking on lessons. She's not the person that she was at the very start of this, who is, let's not forget, the person who inadvertently betrayed her father. And as she's sort of going through this learning process, she goes from hating this idea of Winterfell to yearning to want to get back to it. There's a fantastic uh, moment when she's in the Eyrie and it's snowing, and she finds herself making a castle, and she finds herself making Winterfell Castle. And there are many, many layers to what's going on there, but one of them is definitely this subconscious desire within her, feeling within her that that's home, that's safety in some way. That is what she yearns for. So, like a number of the Starks, this idea of her Stark identity is going to start to increasingly show as we go through this, and this idea, this concept that she wants to get back home to Winterfell will also continue to grow. There's also growth that's very apparent in how she sees the exteriors of people and the interiors of people. When she heads down south, she has all of these wonderful ideas about the chivalric virtues of knights and things along those lines. Uh, As she gets there, she sees what the Kingsguard are like, and it's not what she was expecting. And the courtly life is not what she was expecting. And the beautiful husband to be, Joffrey, was actually not what she was expecting. And Joffrey he's actually described as he's a good looking lad. And so that's why she was initially quite enamored of him. She just had this image in her mind of, I will be the queen to this wonderful husband. Over time, she starts looking back and seeing that some characters who externally the world might see them as being ugly, less than attractive, people like the Hound, people like Tyrion, she starts to look back on those characters and say, actually, they weren't that bad. That's character growth. She's starting to move past what she was like when she was 11. She's also learning to manipulate. She, at the beginning, was being manipulated completely by Cersei, by Littlefinger, by lots of different people. But then, just in drops and slowly gathering, you see her learning how to be the person who is doing that manipulating. There is early on in A Clash of Kings, we get the scene when she convinces Joffrey. There's the mini tourney in King's Landing, and she convinces Joffrey to go easy on oh, complete mind blank on the character. You know who I'm talking about, the drunken knight who turns up, and Joffrey basically wants him killed. And Sansa's there. No. This will be much more fun if we make him a fool. And Joffrey relents, and that's her manipulating him. So that's the start, really, of her realizing that actually she can start to manipulate other people. By the time we get to the Elaine chapter we have in the pre-release chapter in The Winds of Winter, she's going round putting ideas in people's minds. She's subtly trying to influence this person and that person, trying to make something happen. When she meets Harry the Heir, then he's got this impression of her to start with, and she kind of manages to turn it around. She's now the person who's doing the manipulating. Where does she learn this from? Well, she's had some high-level manipulators to be learning from. Cersei, obviously, Tyrion, Littlefinger. She, through this period, is turning from somebody who is, she's talked about as being little bird, this kind of caged animal, pretty to look at, but can't really do anything, is very ineffective, to actually being behind the scenes, quite effective at what she does. So that's another one of these shifts. And probably the fourth thing that I would draw out is sort of connected with the Starkishness point, her walking. Now, she was the first Stark to lose her direwolf. There's a whole story there. A couple of my favorite chapters, actually. Partway into book 1 of Game of Thrones, we get that great scene where she's there down by the riverside with Joffrey, and then Arya's there, and Nymeria attacks Joffrey, and then Cersei demands the life of a direwolf, and it's Sansa's direwolf. And so she loses her direwolf very early on. And this symbolically is showing her being sort of cut off as a Stark. I say symbolically because George R. R. Martin, as we'll come on to, has been quite clear that she does have those kind of skin changer abilities, the walking abilities. It's just that that got cut off early. And one of the kind of the linguistic things that's going on here is that she lost her wolf, but then she gains this kind of connection with the hound. And a bit later, when she's up in the Vale, she forms this connection with this old dog as well, who she kind of sits down next to, and it's not a walking bond, but the dog senses her presence and warms to her, and you just think there's something going on here. There's also an element of is she going to be doing some walking connected to birds? That's a possibility as well that we will come back to. So those are the kind of the high level things that I would just highlight about where she's at in the books as opposed to going on in the show. I should probably also clarify that what happened on the TV show with her marriage to Ramsay Bolton, that does not happen in the books. Is not going to happen in the books. Littlefinger would never do that to her. He's got this kind of creepy, very creepy attachment to her. He would not subject her to that. So that does not happen. But I think that probably she does end up in the north. Littlefinger has a plan that will lead to her. We'll talk about this as well in a moment. That will lead to her going to the north. So there are changes to the books, but the overall arc that we've got of her starting in the north, wanting desperately to leave as this very innocent person with these very wide-eyed views of the world, easily manipulated, as she sort of comes all the way through the Seven Kingdoms, she grows, she becomes more the manipulator, more understanding that you have to look past the outward appearances. And that, and more kind of reconnecting with her starkishness, that is going to be what brings her all the way back up to Winterfell in the north. One of the key questions, obviously, is what happens then? How is she received? How do people think about her? Because it has to be said that the North probably a little bit suspicious of her. When Robb is thinking about his will, he's got this issue that he's married, he's the king, he's not got any children yet. Who does he make his heir until he gets children? So he writes his will. And at the time, he thinks that Bran and Rickon are dead. He thinks that Arya has disappeared and is probably also dead. And he talks to his mother, to Catelyn, about Sansa, and basically says she's married to a Lannister. I can't have her as my heir. So that's the attitude that the North will have, is that she might return as a Northerner. She might return as a Stark. She might return not married to Tyrion. George R. R. Martin has clarified that it is possible to get a marriage annulment. So it's entirely likely that that will be the case. But still, there will be a little bit of suspicion. She also wrote that letter. Cersei basically dictated it, but she wrote that letter sort of begging Robb to bend the knee, which was also not well received in the North. So the idea that she's going to return as this conquering hero that the North will welcome, it falls a little bit short of what is likely to be happening. Okay, so that's the overview. Let's move into a few questions. So AD Ross saying, greetings, Sir Robert, and to you. I hope you and Dan are well. We are, thank you. My question is about Sansa's original marriage prospects before Robert Baratheon decided he wanted her betrothed to his son. son. Do you think Ned would have been looking for a Southron marriage, similar to how Rickard Stark meant for Lyanna to marry Robert? Might Sansa have been wedded to a Riverlands or Vale Lord, or do you think it more likely she would have wedded some Umber or Manderley instead? And if you'll indulge a wider follow-up, do we know how much? Do we know much about Stark marriage strategies for their daughters, and if Lyanna and Sansa ended up as major outliers compared to their foremothers? Well, let's start with the latter question. As a broad point, the Starks, through history, kept to the north in terms of marriages. They, we don't have full history of the Starks over thousands of years, or even a full history of the Starks through the 300 years of Targaryen rule. But we have quite a lot of information, and what we do know is that the vast majority of the time they married other Northerners. There were some other marriages to random families like the Royces, for example, often first men families close to the north. But as a general rule, they married other northern families, strengthening their ties and their rule over the north. So Lyanna Stark was, and Sansa, they were both intended to be, as you would say, outliers to this. So what would Ned have done? Had Robert Baratheon not come up and said, okay, be my hand of the king, and also while we're at it, you've got a daughter, I've got a son, let's marry them. Let's assume that didn't happen. What was Ned's plan? Well, I think we can quite quickly rule out the idea that he was going to do the same kind of thing as his father Rickard. His father Rickard was, and we're told, he had Southron ambitions. What those ambitions might have been is a completely different video. But he clearly was looking to the south. So he sent his children off to be fostered, to be married to people in the south. Ned, for example, he was sent to the Eyrie. He was fostered there. He was fostered with Robert Baratheon, so he forged a link with the Stormlands as well as with the Vale. You get Lyanna herself. She was engaged to be married to Robert Baratheon, forging a link there. I suspect, we don't have full proof, but I suspect that she was, if not being fostered, then certainly she had been told to stay in the Riverlands after the turning at Harrenhal and with a noble family there. And then we get Brandon Stark, obviously, who he was to be married to a Tully, Catelyn Tully. So we get this kind of grand plan of building the connections to the south. Ned probably also would have been married off to somebody in the south. Ned did not take that approach with his children, and he could have done. So Robb was of an age where he could easily have been sent off to some other place to be fostered if Ned had wanted to, but he seemingly didn't want to. There was no particular thought that we know of on any of the other children that they would be sent off to be doing fostering or marriages to people in the south. So probably he would indeed have been married off to some Manderley or Umber or whoever, a big northern house. She would have been there. She's not a first child, but she will have been seen as quite a politically important marriage prospect. Let's put it that way. There is a possibility that even if Robert Baratheon hadn't headed north, then and got Ned as his hand of the king, then he might have tried to create that bridge. There was, it has to be said, around that time, there was a kind of a shortage of no sort of the highest level of noble houses having children of a marriageable age. So, is it possible that Sansa could have been married to Joffrey anyway? Yeah, I think so. I mean, because of the close family ties, she couldn't really be married into the Arryns or the Tullys. So who does that leave? Lannisters and the Baratheons are the prime targets. So yeah, it's a tough one, but I think probably Ned would have ideally wanted her to marry a Northerner. Ariel Winchester saying, "Hello, Robert. I hope you're doing well. Thank you. I was listening to a previous video of yours, and you mentioned that you wouldn't be surprised if Sansa eventually starts walking into birds, given all of the connections between her and birds in the books. Do you think if she does begin walking and becomes aware of this, that she will begin to be more Starkish? Do you think that she could lean more into her northern heritage and believing in the old gods? I've always seen Sansa as more of a Tully than a Stark, but I think it would be a semi-redemption arc for Sansa if she started to lean more into her northern roots. What are your thoughts?" Well, let's talk about the bird thing first. So, having removed the direwolf, but with her still having the potential for skin changing, we've seen the dog bit, the dog that she sort of formed some sort of a bond with, also the hound. But she herself is often associated with bird imagery. She's called Little Bird a lot when she's in King's Landing. People call that the image here seems to be like a bird in a cage, and she's also sometimes kind of inflated with dragonfly imagery and a couple of other sort of flying creature images. She has a moment when she's up in the Eyrie, the falcons fly around, and she looks up at one of them and wishes that she had wings, which is very skin changery kind of language. And there is one intriguing moment when she falls asleep and imagines she can see Marillion, who is the bard who is being framed for the murder of her aunt. And he's in one of the sky cells. So you'll remember them. Tyrion was in one quite early on, high up in the Eyrie. It's just not got a wall, not got an outside wall, and so you've got the sheer drop all the way down. And he's in one of those, and she sleeps and imagines that she can see him huddled there. And people have speculated, perhaps it's not just a random dream. Perhaps she is in her sleep, as Arya does. Arya skin changes in her sleep. Perhaps in her sleep she's skin changing into one of those falcons, and that's how she actually sees Marillion. Because what she sees seems about right. Actually, it seems to be what was going on. So there's lots of this kind of imagery. I increasingly am coming to this idea that yes, the imagery of her skin changing into birds is there, but also we get it's more of a kind of a linguistic imagery of her moving from caged bird, little bird, to a free bird, like the falcon. And as she leans into this and embraces this a whole lot more, that is when she will become herself. She will break free from the controlling factors around her. And when we say controlling factors around her, she's had this all her life. Obviously, when she was a child, she had Ned, who, for all of his virtues, was a strong father who basically told her, "You're now going to marry this person." Then you had Cersei being this controlling influence over her. Now we've got Littlefinger, who is this controlling influence over her. When she finally manages to break free from all of this, that is the moment where she perhaps will be able to walk into a free creature like a falcon. But that, as you say, Ariel, could lead into this idea of her heading back to her actual roots and getting back to the connection with wolves and dogs and starkishness. Lorelei Dragon. Good evening, Robert, and happy spring to you and to you. It wasn't very spring-like here, it has to be said. We had hailstorms here. It wasn't very nice. My thoughts around Sansa's story arc tend to line up with the direwolf name theory. Generally, that she will go from wanting to leave Winterfell full circle to returning to the north and taking a position of power there. What do you think her arc implies about her future? Secondly, I've often thought that the meme of what radicalized you could apply to Sansa. When the rose-tinted glasses fall from her eyes and she starts to see the world as it actually is. Do you think Sansa will be radicalized against the systems of power that have betrayed her? Well, let's start with the first part of this, the direwolf name theory. Now, this is a part of the idea that a lot of us have had for quite some time, that her arc is this full circle, as you described. Starts in Winterfell, she goes through being disempowered, then starting to lose all of the rose-tinted glasses, the things that she's got going on, until finally she re-embraces this idea of starkishness and Winterfell and her place of safety, where finally she has no people in control of her, is Winterfell, where she started. That feels like a very satisfying circle as a kind of character arc. Now, the question is whether this is supported by the direwolf name theory. Now, the direwolf name theory is that the name of your direwolf tells us your fate. So, Ghost tells us that Jon will die and come back in some way. Pretty straightforward. And then you get Bran, Summer. What does that mean? Well, that means he's going to be the king of summer. After we've been through the winds of winter and a dream of spring, what comes next? Summer. And that is Bran's time. So what about Sansa, Lady? Yes, this does support this completely. However, it does also, you could say that if her fate is to become the Lady of the Eyrie, that could also work. It's not necessarily connected into Winterfell. That said, I still like this full circle idea as a kind of an arc. It does really work for me. The second bit you're asking about, sort of what radicalized you, is she then going to become radicalized against the systems of power that have betrayed her? Well, I mean, I don't think George R. R. Martin is going to look at it in quite those terms, but if that arc does happen, if we do get around to Sansa returning to this place of safety, finally she's somewhere where she doesn't have to be worrying about who is the controlling person, who can tell me what to do, who I'm scared of. If being in charge of Winterfell does give her that safety, then yeah, maybe she will seek to change things. I mean, on the TV show, obviously they had her getting independence for the North. Who knows what happens after that? But just being, if she does end up as being the leader of the North, whether it's Queen of the North or whatever other title, then that is radical. We've never heard of a Stark ruling lady. So yeah, I think she's. So I don't think radicalized is the word I would use, but I think she's going to have to end up with a very strong set of ideals, because of her experiences. She cannot go through what she's gone through, get back to Winterfell and go, oh, well, I really like chivalry and great knights, and that will not work. She will have to be different and changed. Sir Friend saying, happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday to you. It is Thursday when you're watching this, but Wednesday when I'm recording it. I've recently started my 5th read through. Well, congratulations. with a specific focus on what might be foreshadowing, particularly in Book 1. When Cat tells Ned about the assassin sent to kill Bran, his immediate thought process is about the wolves and him killing Lady. It's fascinating for George to focus on this. Do you think there are consequences or plot points still to come for Sansa not having Lady? Or is it limited to the start of her arc wanting to distance herself from her northern heritage? Best wishes, warmest regards, and to you. You supplied the quote, which is really helpful. Thank you. So, and when she was done, when Cat, I assume, was done, Eddard Stark sat dazed beside the table, the dagger in his hand. Bran's wolf had saved the boy's life, he thought dully. What was it that Jon had said when they found the pups in the snow? Your children were meant to have these pups, my lord. And he had killed Sansa's. And for what? Was it guilt he was feeling, or fear? If the gods had sent these wolves, what folly had he done? So there are a few things going on here, but the first, and I think the biggest thing, is this concept of those couple of chapters I talked about them a bit ago, those couple of chapters when they're at the inn at the crossroads, and you get the whole incident with Sansa and Arya and Direwolf and Joffrey. That is brilliantly written because this is a microcosm of what will happen when they get to King's Landing. What will happen is that we see Cersei's calling the shots behind the scenes. Robert doesn't have the strength to stand up to her. Joffrey's nasty. Sansa is going to, for a time at least, defer to him. Arya is going to be rebellious and just do her own thing. And you see every single character there. And from that moment, we should be able to work out roughly what's going to be happening when all of this group of people head to King's Landing, because that is played out at a much bigger scale when they get there. And this is therefore tied into what Ned is thinking here. Is he's thinking, I should have, perhaps I shouldn't have killed that direwolf because the direwolves are supposed to be here. This is a kind of a rare moment for Ned, though, that he doesn't often. He clearly kind of he's a worshipper of the old gods. He does pray. We're told he prays to them, but this is one of the few times we actually hear him kind of thinking through these kind of ideas of the gods want this. Should I have done this? It's actually kind of a religious aspect to Ned that we don't see all that much. He's querying whether actually Sansa ought to have had that, and if he doesn't have that protection, what does that mean? So, at a very basic level, what this is doing is just showing Ned realizing that we should have, that the direwolves were protecting my kids. The direwolves were looking after them. And now the two children I've got down here don't have their direwolves, so they don't have protection. And so he's concerned. And that, yes, does play through what we see in later on in Book 1, where it is the well-being of Sansa in particular, because Arya's obviously run off, it's the well-being of Sansa in particular that is what drives Ned when he's in the black cells. And Varys comes to him and he's trying to persuade him of the way out that Varys wants him to take because of Sansa. And Ned is thinking, well, I got rid of her protection. So that's the sort of the main thing that's going on. Is this going to play out later? Well, I've already talked about the lack of the direwolf and what this might mean for Sansa. I think clearly she could not have had Lady, her direwolf, with her when Littlefinger took her away and still have this disguise as Elaine Stone. Because if you're just this poor bastard girl, why on earth have you got a massive direwolf with you? That's kind of Starkish. People would have seen through it straight away. So it is playing out still. The lack of that direwolf is playing out now, and it will perhaps come up again. When she gets to the north, we will come back to this point a number of times. How will she be received? Is she going to look and feel like a Stark? Well, you married a Lannister. Now you've married effectively an Arryn, a Harding, but not a Northerner. She doesn't look Starkish. She's got the red hair of the Tullys. These other Starks, they've got their direwolves. Where's her direwolf? She's not going to appear Northern, and that will probably play into how her and her claim, because she will be going up there with a claim, will be dealt with. Yildenil, how do you think that Sansa emulates her parents, personality-wise? And do you think she'll be able to take control over her life at some point? So, taking control over her life, I think we sort of played with this idea a few times already, but yeah, if you buy into the full arc theory, yes, she will, and that's where she's going to end up. If you don't, then perhaps you think that she's still going to remain under Littlefinger's control for a little while longer. As for the first part, how she emulates her parents, I mean, it's easier, it has to be said, to see Kat and her personality in there, in that Sansa is clever. She's just a bit slow in learning stuff. She's political. She becomes very aware and seems to enjoy understanding all the different political links that are going on. And she's manipulative. And Kat is also kind of manipulative. You see her thinking through, how do I get this person to do the thing I want them to be doing? In a way that Ned doesn't. He's very straightforward, Ned, in his thinking. He's just doing the thing that he thinks he ought to be doing at any given moment in time. So there's a lot more Kat in there. But where's the Ned bit? I mean, it's hard to sort of put this down as a personality trait, but Ned goes along with what he feels he has to do at that moment in time. And Sansa does too. So Sansa is told, you're marrying Joffrey. Great. She goes down. She's embracing it. She's doing the thing she ought to be doing. You're supposed to marry Tyrion. She doesn't. Does she have a choice? No. Does she like it? No. But in the grand scheme of things, she doesn't try and run off. She doesn't try and do anything, hugely dramatic. She does do what is expected of her. And through this all, she's a lot more passive in her kind of mental state and approach to things than Kat is. Kat is always trying to do a thing, trying to push something, make something happen. Ned, less so. He does step up and become proactive, but you just always feel with Ned that he's which direction he's going to go in, and he's going down that direction no matter what. And Sansa thus far has been going down the direction that we're kind of expecting her to. There's not been any moments really where we've gone, whoa, Sansa, what are you doing? That's Cat more. O'Reilly saying, hi, I've been a patron since 2021. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate it. Actually, while I think of this, moderators, I know you're going to be there. If you're watching this live, the moderators will still be there in the chat. Could you just show them a little bit of love? remotely from yesterday. I'm also showing some love, moderators. Thank you. Thank you also, patrons. I hugely appreciate you for all that you do. A quick shout out to anybody watching on Facebook. We're doing this live on Facebook these days. Still haven't quite worked out how to do the chat over there, but we'll figure that one out at some point. But hello if you are, and hello also on X if you're there. Oh, right. Anyway, let's get back to this one. Bo Riley. My question is Sansa aware of Mya Stone's parentage? Given the timing of Mya's birth and Ned being fostered at the Eyrie, it's possible that Ned had met Robert's daughter. Mya and Sansa's interaction gives me the same sort of uncomfortable feeling that I get when other characters have missed connections that we readers catch, e.g. Sam and Arya in Bravos or Gendry and Bella at the inn. Sansa, however, is a clever one. Do you think she has put together that Mya is Robert's daughter? Mya seems to have a memory of Robert. Might she have one of Ned? Could be a touching way for Sansa to connect to her Stark family while in the Vale. Okay, so the short answer is yes. Sansa knows about Mya Stone. So Mya Stone, for those who do not know, she's the person who guides people up and down the Giant's Lance, so the Eyrie at the very top, the mountain. And this takes skill. It's if you read the chapter, particularly the one where Cat is going up there, this is a really hard trek. And you have to be sure-footed, and you have to know where you're going. And she's an expert at it. She is Robert Baratheon's bastard daughter. However, he did not acknowledge her, which means that she, everyone knows, basically, who she is. She knows who she is, but no one can officially acknowledge it. And that information, or that kind of like, let's keep this a little bit secret, is only exacerbated by once Robert Baratheon has gone and the Lannisters are more in power. It's not quite the brag as it once was. Yeah, I'm the king's daughter. Does Sansa know who she is? Well, I'll read a little bit from one of Sansa's chapters, and it says, Mya liked to say that her father had been a goat and her mother an owl, but Elaine had gotten the true story from Maddie. Yes, she thought, looking at her, Mya, now. Those are his eyes. And she has his hair too, the thick black hair that he shared with Renly. So Sansa went digging. Sansa heard Mya Stone saying, oh, my father was a goat or whatever it was she said. Her father was a goat and her mother an owl. And Sansa knew, no, it's not that. But she's clearly someone important, and went and found out. So Mya knows. She, at another point, she remembers her father. She says, no, I have a memory of a man who picked me up and threw me up in the air and caught me. He was a really, really tall man. I felt really safe around him. I knew he would always catch me. But that was basically it. That was her memory of her father. So Mya knows, Sansa knows, but Mya doesn't know that Sansa is a Stark. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps Sansa, once she has been revealed to the world as a Stark, might get a bit of information about what her father was like from her. But there were many people in the Vale who will have met her father when he was there. So the Mya Stone thing is not just an interesting thing here for the Sansa storyline. It was also an interesting thing here for the Cat storyline, because she's presented with this person who she knows is the bastard daughter of Robert Baratheon, and this is bringing to mind Jon Snow, the bastard son of her husband. And she does actively think through and sort of compare how these two were treated. So she's used as a way for people to be kind of reacting against. I don't think she's going to play a hugely important role in Sansa's future, but yeah, who knows? Nakia, where does Sansa rank on the list of magical Starks? Does she have any magic? Will she become stronger as magic gets stronger? Well, in terms of Starks getting stronger as magic gets stronger, George R. R. Martin hasn't set out all of the background to how his magic system works. He likes to keep it mysterious, but it seems that the magic which is getting stronger and more powerful now that the dragons are back. For example, the pyromancers find it easier making their wildfire. The fire mage in Karth that Danny is told about can perform greater miracles there. The glass candles are working again. So there's this kind of ambient magic level has gone up. That doesn't seem to be the same as skin changing, which is not just a magical thing. It's just a natural thing in many ways for those who have the ability. It's not something you don't need to expend power to do this in some way. It's just who you are. You can, if you're a skin changer, then you can sort of put yourself into an animal. So that isn't an extra magical thing. That didn't seem to go away when the dragons went away. It was just part of life for how skin changes work. So that's the first part of this. In terms of Sansa, I've said before that Sansa is a skin changer, even though we didn't really see it or didn't see much of it. This is what George R. R. Martin has said about this. He says, I don't know if I want to get into genetics. This is fantasy, not sci-fi. But I don't think this is necessarily, this being skin changing, is necessarily a Stark ability, though all the children have it to one extent or another, including Sansa, therefore. They also realize it to one extent or another. Arya doesn't realize she has it. She keeps thinking she has these weird dreams. And of course, Bran is much further along. So we're invited here to consider, where is Sansa on this? How powerful is she as a skin changer, as a walk? We didn't ever really get the chance to find out. How aware of it is she? Not even slightly. So that means that it will probably have to kind of creep up on her, pardon me, creep up on her for her to gain some kind of understanding. In the same way that Arya is quite a strong skin changer, but she doesn't really understand that, because when she skin changes into Nymeria, it's when she's sleeping. It's just purely unconscious. It's just a thing that she does. She thinks that she's just having wolf dreams. We know that there's more going on. Hello, Jones. Hello, Robert. Do you think it's possible that Sansa gets an expanded ending compared with the show? With Littlefinger seemingly setting her up to become Lady of Winterfell, as well as wed to Harry the Heir and securing the Vale. If her uncles die as well, she may inherit the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands, more or less. Could she end up an independent queen of not just the North, but an enlarged, united Northern Kingdom of all three of these realms? Perhaps. But this is the point where I want to drop in what George R. R. Martin said recently. He was doing an interview with the Hollywood Reporter just before A Night of the Seven Kingdoms came out. Now, this was a big interview. They had lots of really good information, but it's kind of got lost by the fandom in discussions because we've learned so much stuff afterwards in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, with all those kind of spoilers from the cast, things like that. But he said in the middle of that interview, he said this while discussing the TV show and the books. He said, I was going to kill more people, not the ones they killed in the show. They made it more of a happy ending. I don't see a happy ending for Tyrion. His whole arc has been tragic from the first. I was going to have Sansa die, but she's been so appealing in the show, maybe I'll let her live. So this is intriguing because it suggests that his plan, up until relatively recently, has been that Sansa will die. So our theories about this full character arc loop that brings her back up to Winterfell as being the Lady of Winterfell, as ruling the North and other places, perhaps, that wasn't what George R. R. Martin had been planning all this time. Which does make you wonder why. What was he then planning? But the implication is she's going to die somehow. How would she die? We'll come back to that bit a little bit later. Um, we'll also come back to the implication we've got here that George R. R. Martin has changed what he's doing because of the TV show, which is something that we've long emphasized he's not going to do because he's writing his own story. But here it seems pretty clear. He thought that Sansa came across as pretty sympathetic, and so maybe he will let her live. Um, we have to understand perhaps the context here, which is twofold. Firstly, it seems reasonably clear from where the story is going as a whole that although Sansa is a major character, she's not one of the key characters for the denouement of how this story will come to an end against the others or what's going on with the dragons. She may well be important, but she is not critical. This is more to do with Jon and Dany and Tyrion and Bran and Arya. She's an important character, Sansa, but not one of those who is the center of this. George R. Martin, from very early on, was quite clear. Those five are the main characters who are going to survive all the way through to the end. Others may not. So that's the first point. She is not essential to the end of this story. He could kill her off, and he would still be able to do the things he was planning to do with the others and the dragons and things like that. We should probably also, secondly, point out that Sansa, although now she's the fandom, she's not a fandom favorite, but I think a lot of members of the fandom have got a soft spot for her. They see her character arc, they're thinking of where it's going to be going. They're kind of on her side. That wasn't always the case. When we'd only had one or two books, three books, a lot of people didn't like Sansa. I have to admit, for the first few seasons of the TV show, I wasn't a massive fan either, because she betrays her family inadvertently. She doesn't take much by way of proactive steps at any point to try and escape herself. She doesn't push to do things. She happily, passively accepts Littlefinger being in charge, doesn't question him at all. She's quite a frustrating character in many ways. And there was in the fandom quite a lot of hate for her. The TV show made her a lot more sympathetic, partly because of the whole Ramsay thing. That just built up this, oh, well, she's been through a lot. And that made her more sympathetic as a character, and therefore it felt even better for her to get to this solid and happy ending. In fact, just as by the by, Sophie Turner has said that she was happy with her character's ending, but most of the other cast weren't. So she clearly thought that Sansa's story reached a good and satisfying and happy place for Sansa, which I think I would agree on the TV show. I thought that worked quite well for her. So in that light, I think it's probably fair to say that when George R. R. Martin is saying that she's been so appealing in the show, what he's really saying is in the book she hasn't been that appealing yet, but they did some things that made her character arc work better for a slightly happier ending. Orion's Orcas. Sansa is my least favourite Stark, as we were saying. She lies and lets Lady be killed, runs to Cersei, which leads to the Stark household being killed, Ned arrested, and Arya's first kill while escaping. She turns a violent encounter with Sandor into the unkiss, and just basically is a victim. However, she is getting sick of being used by Littlefinger. She's becoming better at observing others, and I hope she learns how to walk into birds and does something meaningful like killing Littlefinger. As Ned Stark said, he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Didn't George R. R. Martin say he was planning to kill her off? Whether she lives or dies, I think she has betrayed her house and direwolf to the point that Queen of the North is a ridiculous notion. Remember, all these Stark kids are very young, and Sansa shouldn't get a pass for her age. What do you think? So, um, her becoming Queen of the North. I've got more questions about this coming up, but I will first of all make the case for this as not just the culmination of an arc, but also kind of pragmatically. I've argued previously that Bran becoming king kind of pragmatically makes sense, partly because, well, who else is going to be king? And partly because the Starks were the most powerful on the TV show, the most powerful in that people in that council. That there were three Starks there, plus the best friend of another Stark, plus somebody who'd been sworn to be the um, a member of like the effectively a sworn sword to one of the Starks. Somebody else who'd been handed a king to a Stark. I mean, there's a lot. They were in charge of what happened there, and so that kind of made sense. Sansa ruling Winterfell. If you're going to have a Stark ruling Winterfell, it might simply be that she's the last Stark standing. By which I mean, Robb is obviously already gone. Jon, I'm pretty bought into this idea. He's going to go north of the wall. Rickon, I think, will be dead. Arya is younger than Sansa and also won't want to be a lady. She's been very clear about that from the start. So actually, Sansa's the last Stark standing. She is the person who is best placed to rule Winterfell at the end of all of this. So, I mean, that's, I think, quite a key part of the argument for why she could do. If she survives to the end, the most logical thing for her as a sort of a, well, what happened to her is ruling Winterfell. Ranabin Mitra. We know that there's a chance that the scrapping of the 5-year time skip probably foiled a famous old theory in the fandom around Sansa's suitors mirroring the champions in the tourney of Ashford Meadow. The fifth champion being a dragon could have implied that Fagon and her could get married. But instead, after the 5-year time skip was abandoned, Arianne Martell seems to have taken up that role. So my question is about Sansa's storyline still still involving a trial either by combat or by seven. Whether her storyline takes her north to Winterfell or south to Harrenhal to deal with Littlefinger. Do you see the concept of a trial being associated with the Sansa storyline in the Winds of Winter after the Vale plot is resolved? Okay, so there's quite a lot in there, but let's first of all unpack this theory. It is quite an old fan theory. It's quite persistent though, which is the fact that people have noticed that the tourney at Ashford Meadow in the Hedge Knight, we saw it in A Knight of Seven Kingdoms. There is, if you sort of actually look, forgetting for one moment the real action of what's going on with Duncan and the like, who actually are there's 5 champions there. That's the way this works. And what order do those champions kind of appear? Are they? Yep. Pardon me. We get first of all we get a Baratheon, Then we get after that. Hang on, let me just try and catch up. Tyrell, that's Leo Tyrell, Lionel Baratheon, Leo Tyrell. Then a Lannister, then a Harding, then a Targaryen. Now, people have noticed that this sort of matches up with the people that Sansa either marries or is potentially engaged to be married to. So Baratheon, Joffrey, Baratheon. Then she gets potentially there's this the plot gets foiled, but Olenna Tyrell has a plot to get her married off to her grandson. Then we get a Lannister, and then which is obviously Tyrion, and then a Harding. We get Harry, the heir, and then what about a Targaryen? So personally, I like the thinking behind this theory, but this strikes me as just one of those coincidences. It's I don't think we should be looking at it as a particular hint. I don't think George R. Martin was when he was writing the Turning at Ashford Meadow, he was thinking about Sansa's potential future marriage partners, and I don't think when he was writing about who Sansa was getting engaged to, he was thinking, I really must write these names up in a tourney as the champions in a tourney. Because there's no specific link either between the tourney at Ashford Meadow and Sansa. It's not like thematically there's something. There's no Stark there. There's nothing linking Sansa there in any sort of high level way. So I don't personally, I'm not a big fan of that theory. The bigger question you've got is whether or not this might Sansa might be connected with a trial by combat or of seven. I mean, maybe, but the connection between that tourney and the trial by seven, yeah, that happened there. But if we're saying that there's no obvious link between Sansa and the champions, then there's even less of a link between her and the trial of seven that happened. So I don't think that there's a strong line of causality going on there at all. It's the tourney. Yeah, absolutely. She seems to have manipulated people into having a tourney in order to create this new order of sort of knightly order, a bit like a Kingsguard. But so she set up a tourney for this. So there is the tourney link, but not a trial link, which doesn't mean that there won't be a trial in any way associated with her, but I don't think there's the link across to that tourney. Great. What paths do you anticipate for Sweet Robin and Harold Harding? Does the Arryn line survive in the books? So I think Sweet Robin, rather sadly, he's going to die. George R. Martin is going to kill a lot of characters, let's not forget. So we should be looking for characters who are going to die. And this is a very sickly child who Littlefinger has said he surely won't survive long. And when somebody like Littlefinger says, he surely won't survive long, you kind of assume that that character surely won't survive long. So, yeah, I think he will die. It's part of Littlefinger's plan, is that he wants Sansa to be marrying Harry the heir at a point where she will then become the queen, effectively, or the first lady of the Vale, and then reveal herself as a Stark. That's the plan. As for Harry the heir, I think again the critical player here is Littlefinger, and we have to ask, what does Littlefinger want from this? He is setting up Sansa for this potential marriage. He does have this weird, creepy relationship to Sansa, so I don't think he will long term want those two married. But perhaps he will see an advantage in her getting pregnant and having his child, thereby securing the future of the Vale. It would, and if Harry then dies, then who actually is the ruler of the Vale? This small child, Littlefinger, can announce himself regent and Lord Protector for until that child has grown up. His power is even more increased, um, and Sansa has power, and he can then take her up to the north as not married to any other people. So yeah, I think Sweet Robin's going to go soon. I think Harry will go not too long after he marries Sansa. Um, Craig also asking, how dark of a turn do you anticipate Sansa making as Littlefinger's toxic influence mixes with her need to survive? The show hinted at her and Arya threatening each other. So Sansa is going to turn darker in as much as that she's going to be manipulative, but also the conflict between Sansa and Arya in Winterfell, it's possible, and I will get onto this, it's quite a dark take on what might happen. It's possible that there will be a conflict between those two. But more likely, what that was sort of acting as a proxy for was the fact that the Starks, there will be a Stark succession crisis in Winterfell. We know that the Manderleys, I think they've tracked down Rickon, and they're going to bring Rickon in as here's the Stark we want in Winterfell. Bran will probably turn up at some point. Sansa will turn up at some point with Littlefinger and the Knights of the Vale, and Jon will appear, and somebody will point out that he was named heir by Robb. So you have these four characters, and then Arya will appear too, but I doubt she'll get too involved in this element of things. But we've got four characters, four Starks effectively, who each have a claim. And I think the tension there will not necessarily be between the Stark siblings, but it will be between those who are supporting each of those siblings, if that makes sense. So I think that's what they were doing, kind of a proxy for. There is a darker idea, which I will get onto in just a moment. Flame G saying, hello, Robert, hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. Why is Sansa romanticizing Sandor Clegane? I know you mentioned before that she's an unreliable narrator, but why does she misremember specifically him kissing her? Is it because he tried to save her and thinks of him as a knight? If I remember right, she always thought of him as scary and disgusting. Or perhaps there's another reason of her misremembering a kiss. So for those who don't know this one, this is the unkiss. That's what the fandom have called it, the unkiss. Sansa, we see in A Clash of Kings during the Battle of the Blackwater, all of the wildfire goes up, and Sandor Clegane leaves. He quits, and before he leaves King's Landing, he goes up to Sansa's room, and he's there, and he basically says, "Come with me. I'll look after you." And Sansa's very scared. Basically says no. And she looks back on this much later, a couple of times, and she remembers him kissing her. But he didn't. When we were looking at what was actually happening at the time, that didn't happen. And George R. R. Martin has addressed this. He was asked about this, and he said this: "You will see in A Storm of Swords and later volumes that Sansa remembers the Hound kissing her the night he came into her bedroom. But if you look at the scene, he never does. That will eventually mean something. But just now it's a subtle touch, something most of the readers may not even pick up on. File this one under unreliable narrator and feel free to ponder its meaning." So why? I mean, I think there's a couple of levels to this. One of them is the why that specific thing. there's a number of different. I think I may have even done a video on this one. I can't remember. There's a number of different theories as to why that is. But at heart, certainly part of the equation is this playing of Sansa's idea of the noble chivalric knight, with her darker understanding of what knighthood actually is like and what these knights are like. And the Hound had been chivalrous in a way, not in a perfect way by any stretch of the imagination, but he had not been rough with her when he didn't need to be. He kind of protected her a couple of times from doing things which would get her punished. He seemed to react well to her, and this, therefore, at a kind of basic level, does seem to be Sansa, as still a very young girl, kind of mixing up this kind of chivalric ideal with the idea that actually this guy was probably the best of them. So there's a very basic idea. Some people have suggested that this is perhaps hinting at other things, darker things about what Joffrey may have done and stuff like that. I'll allow you to go off and explore all of those ideas if you wish to. But I think the bigger point here is the fact that she is an unreliable narrator. Now, George R. R. Martin has talked about this a lot, but we've not seen many examples of it. And by unreliable narrator, everything, we mean everything in this story is told from different people's POVs. It's told from, we see the world through the eyes of these different characters. If we can't trust what we're shown, that means that we have to interpret this story in a very different way. And most of the time we can kind of trust what's going on, but there are some occasions where you get Arya and Sansa remember different names for Joffrey's sword. One of them's right, one of them's wrong. It's an unreliable narrator. And another time, one of my favorite little instances of this is when we get the word snow, when you get somebody hearing Melisandre say it, they hear snow with the lowercase s, like it's just snow around us. When we hear it from her perspective, we have a capital S. So she's actually talking about Jon Snow. So that is an unreliable narrator. We also have elements with Cersei, who you can't really believe. Her interpretation of events is so far off all the time. But here, we have something which is quite significant and potentially quite troubling, which is that Sansa, it's not just that she sees the world in a slightly different way and doesn't understand everything that's going on. It's not even that she forgets something. And so we can't trust everything that she says because she's forgotten something. She made something up. Her mind imagined a thing that did not happen. That does make me wonder whether George R. R. Martin is highlighting it because that is going to be an important part of her character going forward. We've already seen how she is trying to buy into this idea of Elaine. This is where it starts getting dark. I said, I'm not saying this is where this story is going, but it's possible. If she is now in a place where she's inventing memories and Littlefinger is telling her things happened, is she going to start remembering them as if they actually did happen? So if Littlefinger, for example, he tells her that she's Elaine, we repeatedly see her having to go, oh, I'm a Stark, whatever, and then saying, no, I can't say that. I must not. I mustn't even think it. I am Elaine Stone. Might there be things that Littlefinger put in her mind that she just does buy into and believe. And if that's the case, when she gets to the north, rather than being somebody who finally can be liberated from Littlefinger, maybe she's actually going to be somebody who is manipulated enough that she believes fundamentally some of the things that Littlefinger has said. And that might not leave her in a very good position vis-a-vis the Northern Houses. Purple Feline, I was wondering how you think Sansa will handle Littlefinger when she has more power. Also, do you think she will see the Hound again, and how would that go? So Littlefinger, I've talked to the Dark Path here. The Dark Path is that she kind of sticks with him. We don't want her to, but if she buys into this, if she actively starts to believe what he's telling her, and she does have a number of these thoughts over time that are a little bit, concerning. She thinks that he saved her life twice. So some things it's right to be lying about because some things are important. When she's wondering about what to do, she wishes that Littlefinger were there because he'd know what to do. So there is a dark possibility that she's going to go up there at his side. If she doesn't, I love this idea that she's the person who will be able to say, actually, you know what? This guy oversaw the capture of Ned Stark, and this guy orchestrated the death of Lysa Arryn, and this guy did all of these other things. She is the one who could hand Littlefinger over to be killed. And somebody said a bit earlier with the Ned Stark was always very clear, he who pronounces the sentence should be swinging the sword. Is that what Sansa will do? Because this will be another one of those things where people will go, is she actually properly from the north, or is she really now from the south? So Steve the O. Hello, Robert. I trust you and Dan are well. We are. Thank you. As you have mentioned, there is a bit of bird-related imagery or references regarding Sansa. Do you anticipate her walking into a bird or birds? And would that be plot significant? And on that thought, given her current location in the Vale and the House of Arryn's sigil of a falcon, could that imagery be important to her current plot with regard to the Arryn succession? P.S. What do you think of the June 3 trailer? Well, I'll just very quickly talk about June 3. Yeah, I saw the trailer as of today. I don't know exactly when it came out. It was a few days ago. I liked the trailer. Visually, it's great, which is exactly what I expected. June 1 and June 2 were visually stunning. June Messiah, it's been a few years since I've read June Messiah, which is what this June 3 is being adapted from. From memory, though, it is, and we often say this, but I think this is genuinely the case here. It's a tough book to adapt. There's a huge amount of sort of things just sort of going on in people's minds, and kind of like more spiritual stuff going on. Yeah, it'd be quite hard to do. I didn't see huge amounts of that in the trailer, but they probably wouldn't play that up in the trailer, focusing in more on kind of action sequences. Overall, though, it looked good. I think I'm probably not alone in this. I will watch this, even if the trailers were all rubbish. June 1 and June 2 were good enough to get my confidence that I want to watch June 3. So, yeah, I liked it. I thought it was good. But on your more broad point about the birds, there, yeah, I mean, I think I've probably covered this actually in a couple of earlier questions. The two main points, the symbolism of the bird being free, I think is very important. And then secondly, there's certainly a possibility she may already have walked into a bird, but she's not really realized it while she was sleeping, looking from the outside in to see Marillion. Is this going to be plot important going forward? I suspect not, because one of the key things about the Starks being on their own is that nobody is training them in this. Nobody is saying, okay, so what just happened there was you just did a little bit of unconscious walking. Next time, try and guide it a little bit. No one is doing any of this. The only person getting any training is Bran. The rest, they're just kind of making it up as they go along. And whereas we blithely are talking about the Starks are all skin changers, they don't know that. They don't. This isn't a thing. This isn't a Stark inheritance. Every Stark is a skin changer. Ned sat them down as children and said, "Oh, so at some point you may find that you bond very closely with a particular." That's not how this is. The idea that they might be skin changers probably never crossed their mind. So that's why Arya, for example, can be walking into Nymeria most nights and not for 1 second think, "Oh, am I a skin changer?" So I think Sansa, given all of that, she may well end up walking into some things, but I don't think she's going to be strong enough to control that in some way. And I suspect she might not even know that that's the case. She might not even be aware that she's doing it. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura, saying, I know that Lord Baelish is grooming Sansa to be the heir to Winterfell. How do you think she will be accepted? What do you think they'll find out? What will happen, do you think, when they find that Rickon is still alive? Will the North want him as heir instead? On that first point, just before carrying on, yeah, I think that the general consensus is that if the Starks have got Rickon and Sansa, Rickon will be ahead of her in the line of succession anyway. So yes, but then also I think no matter what happens, she's going to not come across as very northern, whereas he is going to come across as very northern with his direwolf there by his side. On the TV show, Sansa ends up as queen in the north. Do you see that same fate happening to her at the end of the book series? Um, I know Rickon is male and the north looks to men to inherit, but given Rickon's youth and lack of training and maturity, would he even be emotionally and mentally capable of his inheritance of Winterfell? I'm concerned Rickon would just be used as a puppet ruler with someone behind the scenes pulling the strings, like Peter Baelish is wanting to do. So, if Rickon, or Sansa for that matter, is the Lord or Lady of Winterfell, almost certainly there will be some sort of regent slash caretaker to be helping them, a Lord Protector type, because they are children still. We don't know exactly what the age of inheritance in the north is, but in the south it seems to be about 15. So maybe Sansa will get there, but Rickon certainly won't within this story. So even if he is made the titular Lord of Winterfell, there will be somebody there ruling as Castellan. So that's just how it would operate, I think. Will Sansa end up as Queen in the North? As I said, at the moment, I'm putting this 60-40 in favour, maybe even 70-30, because of what George R. Martin said. Now, the fact is that where I thought that was going to be the case beforehand, based on character arcs, now I think we have to accept that George R. Martin wasn't thinking that. So all of our clever thinking about Sansa's character arc, that's not where George R. Martin was going with this one. Agalos Lucatos saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you are well. What do you think of George R. Martin's recent comment regarding Sansa? There was a time when he was firm about people's opinions not affecting his work, but now it seems that after the controversies surrounding Game of Thrones, as well as the reception some of the characters received, he appears more open to external ideas affecting his writing process." So let's pick up on this broader point here with what George R. Martin was saying, which is he clearly implies that based on, or not just implies, he clearly says that based on what happened in the TV show, he's actively considering changing the fate of one of the main characters. Now, we've never had that before. We've had a few odds and ends. So Osha, we were mentioning her a moment ago, he did go on record as saying, actually, the actress, I've forgotten her name at the moment, but the actress who was Osha, he thought did a splendid job. And he was actively considering giving the character of Osha a bit more screen time or page time or whatever it is we have with books when she comes back into the story, because he really liked the characterization. So that is just for a small character though. And this with Sansa seems more significant because it is one of the more significant characters. I think the big thing I would point out is that this is him potentially changing his mind because of something he liked, which is something that he's been quite consistent about. Is if he likes something in a TV show, then yeah, maybe he'll change that. We've not yet, I think, heard him say about anything significant, I didn't like how that turned out on the TV show. I was going to do that, but now I'm going to change my mind. So I wouldn't read too much into this. But I would say that we now have to accept that he does sometimes take account of what happens in the TV show and shift what he's going to do in the books. And a good example of this might therefore be, what if something happens in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms that he thinks is great? If he really loved the characterization of Lionel Baratheon, is he, when he's writing future Dunk and Egg stories or the Blood and Fire, is he going to change his earlier conception of what Robert Baratheon is because of what happened on the TV show? Not Robert Baratheon, Lionel Baratheon. So that's the kind of question we now need to be asking. How far did this go? I suspect it's not huge. I suspect it's not going to be covering the main points, the end points of this story, but still, it's going to be there. Caleb Weirs, hey Robert, I've been having a thought about Sansa's potential death. What if the others capture or destroy Winterfell and she goes down with the ship? Maybe the Winterfell statues cover humanity's retreat through to the God's Eye Lake, and she stays behind to control them. What do you think? I think we do need to be looking for how she could die now. Perhaps George R. R. Martin is going to save her from that fate, but he almost certainly had a thought that she should die. Her sort of staying behind to hold the fort while others escape, that's not really, she's not a fighter. So that bit I don't really buy into. The idea that she might die from the others' attack at Winterfell, yeah, I can see that. We have to be clear with ourselves. A lot of characters will die. And when we're reaching that point, they have to be significant enough for us to care. If he just killed off a couple of random minor characters when the others actually finally march on Winterfell, we wouldn't have that feeling of this being the biggest threat to humanity ever. We have to feel the pain somehow. And if we're working on the assumption that some characters who are probably going to be there have to survive even further to the end, Jon Snow, for example, Tyrion, if he's there, Dany, if she's there, if we go with that as an idea, then we have to say, well, who are the other characters who could possibly die? I think Sansa is quite near the top of that list. Adam Geets saying, this is not about Sansa, but after listening to the live stream last week, I was thinking about Bloodraven. Assuming that he was behind all the mysterious Targaryen deaths that trimmed the family tree, how do you think he knew the person that had to inherit the throne? He wasn't hooked up the Weirwood network yet. Dragon dreams are notoriously vague. How did he know what to do? It's a good question. It's just our working theory. Now, I'll put back up a video about this at some point, but Aegon the Unlikely was known as Aegon the Unlikely because of how many different people had to die in order for him to succeed. It's a huge number in a very short space of time. And a lot of these deaths are, let's call them suspicious. So if we take the working assumption that this was in some way Bloodraven influencing events, he was around, pardon me, at the height of his powers in south of the wall, before he was hooked up to the Wood network, but he was Hand of the King. He had this huge spy network. He was a powerful guy. He could do these things. How did he know which bit of the family tree to prune down into? Uh, yes, perhaps he did get dragon dreams. Perhaps he read things that told him which line we should be trying to get to. Perhaps he actively cared about specific magical bloodlines. Did he want to make sure that he got first men blood into this kind of new gene pool? That's easy enough. You can have Egg marrying a Blackwood. That means that we now need to be going down through Egg's family. So maybe it's dragon dreams. Maybe it's stuff that he read. Maybe there's some kind of him coming back in time and influencing things. For all of the ink is dry kind of spiel, he says that quite heavily in the TV show. Less so, but definitely still there in the books. But maybe he's lying. Maybe he can go back in time and influence events from afar. It's entirely possible. He is very powerful. He has been hooked up to the Weirwood network for a while. He'd maybe learned all the tricks. So yeah, how he found out for me isn't a mystery. There are a few different ways that perhaps he could have found out. The the bigger questions are around how did he do it, and at what point was he happy? Because he seemed content to be going up to the wall. We don't get an interview with him at the time, but he seemed content to go up to the wall at the moment at which Egg became king. Was that what he was trying for all that time? It's possible. That's my last A Song of Ice and Fire question. Ranabe Mitra also asked a question about the new announcement we've had. As of when I'm recording this happened today, just a little bit earlier today. We got, which was Tolkien Reading Day. There were a lot of announcements of things that went on today, but this was an announcement from Peter Jackson and Stephen Colbert, who, for those who don't know, he's an American late night talk show, chat show host, who is well known for being a Tolkien aficionado. The announcement was that the next film that's going to be made after The Hunt for Gollum, the next film that's going to be made is going to be one focused in on chapters 3 to 8 of The Fellowship of the Ring. And it is going to be written by Philippa Boyens, who wrote or adapted the main Lord of the Rings films, as well as more recent stuff like War of the Rohirrim, and Stephen Colbert and his son, who I know little to nothing about. So that is the writing team. The idea is to be covering those chapters. How are they going to do that? My best understanding at the moment is through some kind of a framing device. The 3 remaining hobbits, this is 12 years after Frodo has sailed to the west, the 3 remaining hobbits head off to reminisce, I guess, about the first part of their journey out of the Shire all that time ago. Now, Meanwhile, Eleanor, Sam's daughter, finds some hidden secret. So the thinking is that Peter Jackson, and he kind of says this, he missed out a huge chunk of chapters 3 to 8. I've mentioned this on this live stream many times, is that for all of the fact that I love those films, they did make a lot of changes. And one of the biggest changes is by just removing an entire chunk of the story about leaving the Shire and getting to Bree, which includes meeting the elf Gildor. It includes going through the Old Forest. It includes meeting Tom Bombadil. It includes going to the Barrow Downs, how they managed to get those magic swords, a whole load of stuff going on. Peter Jackson removed that for reasons of time as much as anything else. The films were already pretty long. And to be fair, having Tom Bombadil in there would make things it might distract from what he thought was the sort of the central thrust of the narrative arc. Let's put it that way. Tom Bombadil is distracting at all times. It's probably fair to say. But here, what seems to be happening is we have this framing device, and then we'll sort of get the story of that time retold. So we're effectively having these two stories. The one being the hunt for Gollum, and the other being this as yet untitled other film, which are focusing in on the period of the Lord of the Rings and sort of trying to colour in a few of the areas that the films missed out, which as an overall concept, I approve of that. I think that's good. I think I tweeted out, if we still tweet, that I have to say that having moaned a few times over the years about the fact that they took out the bit with the Barrow Downs and the Old Forest and the like, it would be a little churlish of me now to complain about the fact that they're going to kind of go back and retroactively do a thing about that. So I will, as is always the case, I will reserve judgment on the film as a whole until I see it, because at the moment all we've got is a concept. We haven't got any more information than that. Ranabir, you sort of go on to be saying about wanting my opinion on Warner Brothers' strategy regarding the three new movies we have. I assume you're including the War of the Rohirrim there, being a strategic companion pieces to the original trilogy and the Hobbit movies, and a low-budget way that Warner Brother can adhere to their existing contract without damaging the success made in the IP that they own. Risky and/or high-budget ideas like the Angmar Wars, my personal favourite, that's Ranabir's personal favourite, might be good for us fans, but might not be a profitable venture for Warner Brothers. So what's going on there now? In terms of the deal that they have, this always gets very complicated, but Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema appear to have a deal that they have the rights to be making films based on The Lord of the Rings and the appendices for a period of time going forward, but they do have to keep them coming. The War of the Rohirrim, some have rather cynically suggested that it was an animated film rushed out in order to keep their end of the contract. They didn't push it. There was incredibly limited advertising for it. It didn't do very well at the box office, it has to be said. And many people have wondered whether this was just them holding out because they've got some bigger ideas coming up. These are the bigger ideas, the Hunt for Gollum and this one. I don't think it does much for art if it's just trying to produce something because something has to be produced. I have time for the passion that many of the people involved in these seem to have for Tolkien. I approve of that. As I say, I know less about Stephen Colbert than most Americans probably do. I've never seen his show. I've just seen a few little clips online of him talking nerdy talking things, which I approve of. So his uh, ability as a screenwriter is not something I could particularly comment on. But overall, cautiously optimistic. I don't think there was a particular demand for these movies. It has to be said. I think I would agree with you that there are plenty of other bits of Tolkien's Legendarium that perhaps they could have explored, but I understand them wanting to do this with characters that we all know and love as a way to get people back into this. So, yeah, cautious optimism. I'm not really willing to go into much more detail as we literally got a 3-second video clip of Peter Jackson and Stephen Colbert chatting about it and you know, a few sentence long summary. That's all we have. So let's wait and see how it develops. Always love new Lord of the Rings content. I will definitely go and watch it no matter what. And I'll let you know what I think when I see it. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping up this. As I say, it's a pre-recorded live stream, so we're not live right now. But if you are there in the chat, I know that the moderators will have been doing a fantastic job. Could you just give them a little bit more love? I'll be back live next week, and we will do a Lord of the Rings one next week. I promised it for this week, but for various reasons, I've had to do this instead. We will have a Lord of the Rings live stream next week, and then we'll get back onto A Song of Ice and Fire characters. Coming up on the main channel, more videos. Can't think of what I've got coming up, but I will soon be doing a few more series of things. I think Robert's Rebellion series, Blackfire Rebellion series, that kind of thing. Aegon's Invasion series as well, maybe. Who knows? I've got various ideas, but we will get to them in due course. So that is all for this time. Thank you very much, patrons. Thank you very much, moderators. If you're watching this back on IDG Live a bit later, appearing somewhere around here, it's going to be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is my link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so, in which case, thank you. But that is all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.